Welcome to Lecture 15, where we will go over the circulatory as well as the respiratory system. We're now going to take a look at the different components of blood. If you remember, blood is considered to be a type of connective tissue. It's comprised of two main components: plasma, which is considered to be the matrix that suspends the cellular elements. In general, plasma makes up about 55% of blood, while the cellular elements, either red blood cells or white blood cells, make up 45%. Take a look at the diagram to the right to see these individual components in blood. Blood has many different functions, such as the exchange of materials, transport of materials, as well as defense from various types of pathogens. We're now going to take a closer look at the different components of blood. Plasma primarily consists of water, ions, plasma proteins, as well as various other substances such as glucose, fatty acids, and other nutrients and hormones. Also take a look at the major functions of those individual components. The cellular elements are comprised of white blood cells such as leukocytes, eosinophils, lymphocytes, as well as other types of white blood cells, in addition to platelets, and red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes. We're now going to examine the cellular components of blood. Platelets are considered to be cell fragments of specialized bone marrow cells. Platelets are very important in the process of blood clotting as well as wound healing. Erythrocytes are specialized for oxygen transport in the body. Erythrocytes, or red blood cells, have a biconcave shape that helps to increase their surface area and also maximizes the rate of oxygen diffusion across the membrane. Red blood cells also have hemoglobin, which is a specialized iron-containing protein that helps to transport the oxygen. In general, red blood cells lack a nucleus as well as mitochondria. Thus, they can carry out anaerobic respiration to generate a bit of ATP. This is an important adaptation to ensure that the oxygen is not used by the red blood cell itself. Leukocytes, or white blood cells, are present, and their main role is to fight infection in the body. Note that all these cellular components of blood derive from stem cells that originate in the red marrow on long bones, such as ribs, sternum, vertebrae, the pelvis, as well as long bones in the leg, as well as arm. Stem cells that are present in the bone marrow can self-renew simply by undergoing mitosis. When a stem cell divides, it will create an identical daughter cell that will remain a stem cell. It will also create another cell that is allowed to differentiate and specialize into any of the different cellular components. For example, a stem cell can then differentiate into a lymphoid progenitor cell or a myeloid progenitor cell. A lymphoid progenitor cell is responsible for eventually differentiating or producing B cells as well as T cells. Myeloid progenitor cells can have the ability to differentiate into erythrocytes, monocytes, neutrophils, platelets, basophils, or eosinophils. All of these cellular differentiation pathways are usually controlled by various types of hormones that will help determine what type of cell the progenitor cell will differentiate into. We're now going to take a look at how a blood clot or thrombus forms. If there is any damage within a vessel, the connective tissue will be exposed to the blood. This will then cause the platelets to stick to the collagen fibers in the surrounding tissue. This will also increase the adhesiveness between the platelets. When this damage occurs, this will cause the release of various types of clotting factors. These clotting factors are signals that are released from platelets, other damaged cells, as well as plasma. Once the platelets begin to stick to each other, they form a platelet plug. This will help to immediately address the loss of blood. Once this plug is formed, it will then be reinforced by fibrin threads that then will create a fibrin clot. This occurs through a series of enzymatic reactions that you can see in the diagram to the left. Note that the presence of fibrinogen will then be converted to fibrin that will help produce the fibrin clot. Atherosclerosis typically occurs whenever there is damage or infection that cause the roughening of the lining of the arteries. This will then cause inflammation as well as an immune response. Leukocytes will be drawn to the area and interact with the fats and cholesterol that attach to the lining of the artery. This can then lead to the formation of a plaque and hardening of the artery itself. If the plaque eventually ruptures, a thrombus can form, as seen on the slide before. This can be very detrimental and may lead to a heart attack as well as a stroke. A heart attack is also known as myocardial infarction. This is when there is damage or death of cardiac muscle due to a blockage in one or more of the main coronary arteries. A stroke, on the other hand, is the result of death of brain tissue due to the lack of oxygen. This is typically the result of a rupture or blockage of any of the head or neck main arteries. Take a look at the diagram to the lower right to see the formation of a plaque in the walls of an artery. We now know that cholesterol plays a very important role in the development of atherosclerosis. This is because cholesterol can bind to the fibrous connective tissue and helps to contribute to the formation of plaques. In general, cholesterol is transported either by LDLs or HDLs. Low-density lipoproteins are protein-based particles that help deliver cholesterol to cells, whereas HDL, or high-density lipoproteins, will help bring cholesterol to the liver for further processing. If the LDL to HDL ratio is high, this typically means that an individual is at high risk for atherosclerosis. If the LDL to HDL ratio is low, this is a much healthier result for an individual. This is because you would want a higher percentage of HDL circulating. That means that your body has a mechanism to get rid of excess cholesterol through your diet. In general, exercise and a healthy diet can help to keep that ratio low. However, a diet high in trans fats or processed foods, and as well as smoking, can increase the ratio. In general, aspirin can help decrease an immune response. This is why people that have a heart attack are usually prescribed aspirin on a regular basis. This is because aspirin can aid in preventing the reoccurrence of both strokes and heart attacks by thinning out the blood so that the blood can easily flow through any of the areas that may have plaque formations. We're now going to take a look at the overall process of gas exchange and respiratory systems. Gas exchange can occur on a variety of specialized respiratory surfaces. Gas exchange specifically refers to two main steps: the uptake of oxygen from the environment and the release or discharge of carbon dioxide into the environment. Gas exchange is related to partial pressure. Partial pressure is the pressure exerted by one gas in a gaseous mixture. This will allow for the movement of gases at the exchange or respiratory surface. The partial pressure value of oxygen is constant. However, the concentration differs in air versus water. In general, oxygen is less soluble in water. In addition, water is considered to be more dense than air and much more viscous. As a result, it is much harder for an organism to extract oxygen from a liquid medium for gas exchange. In general, respiratory surfaces need to be kept moist so that gases can easily pass through the plasma membrane. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are considered small and nonpolar molecules. As a result, they can easily move through the process of diffusion. In general, if the surface area to distance ratio is large, gas exchange can occur rapidly. However, if the surface area to distance ratio is low, gas exchange will be much slower. As a result, gas exchange surfaces in general tend to be large and very thin. Simple animals like the sponge seen here can undergo simple diffusion to exchange gases quickly with their environment. However, other animals, like this earthworm and some amphibians, can use their skin as a means for gas exchange. We're now going to take a look at the individual respiratory surfaces such as gills. Gills are considered to be outfoldings of the body's surface that are generally suspended in water. Foldings help to increase the surface area to maximize gas exchange. Ventilation in general will occur when the respiratory medium, such as water, moves over the respiratory surface. Many aquatic organisms have different types of adaptations to help keep water moving over the gills. As the water moves over the gills, the partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide allow for gas exchange. Take a look at the 3 organisms below to see their specific adaptations. The marine worm has parapodium, which are modified into gill-like structures. The crayfish has the gills underneath the carapace to help allow for gas exchange, while the sea star has various gill structures that are present within each arm. If you recall the concept of countercurrent exchange occurs when there's exchange of a substance or heat between 2 fluids moving in opposite directions. In fish gills, blood and water move in opposite directions to help maximize the diffusion of oxygen from water and direct the oxygen into the blood. In general, blood will always have a lower oxygen level than the water that is passing over it. This property allows for the maximum amount of oxygen to be extracted from water. Due to the partial pressure differences, oxygen is always drawn into the blood during the entire length of the blood flow through the gills. Take a look at this diagram below to understand the process of countercurrent exchange in gills. This type of exchange, having the blood and the water flow in opposite directions, is extremely efficient. It can extract more than 80% of the oxygen that is present in the surrounding water. We're now going to examine the tracheal system. Insects will have a network of air tubes that help branch throughout their body to help deliver oxygen to all body tissues. Air will enter into the body and trachea through spiracles that will open and close to control the amount of air exchanged. Once the air enters into the trachea will then branch into tracheoles. These will then extend into body cells. Air sacs may also be present within the body, near organs, to help ensure adequate oxygen supplies. As the animal moves throughout its environment, body contractions will help move the air through the tracheal system. Another main type of respiratory surface exists in the lungs. Lungs are considered to be infoldings of the body surface, as opposed to outfoldings that we've seen in gills. Circulatory systems will help transport blood and gases between lungs and body tissues. Lungs have evolved in some aquatic vertebrates in oxygen-poor environments, or in organisms that spend part of their life exposed to air, which is typical in brackish intermittent water areas. The lungfish, for example, that lives in these brackish waters, uses both gills and lungs as a respiratory surface. In mammalian lungs, the ducts and lungs of the respiratory system are located within the thoracic cavity. The general pathway of air within the mammalian lung is as follows. Air will enter in through the mouth and nasal cavity where it is warmed, filtered, as well as moistened. Air will then pass into the pharynx, larynx, and eventually enter into the trachea. The trachea will then branch into 2 bronchi, which will lead to each lung, the right and left. Each bronchi can then branch into many bronchioles that are interspersed within the lung tissue. Eventually, this branching will end at what is termed the terminal bronchioles. The terminal bronchioles will have the sacs of alveoli, which is the site of actual gas exchange. Within the alveoli, there will be small branches of the pulmonary artery and vein that surround the terminal bronchioles and also will lead to the capillaries that surround the alveoli. Gas exchange will then occur, where oxygen is taken up by the cells and carbon dioxide is released. Note the important structures in the pathway of airflow within the mammalian lung. The larynx contains vocal cords that can help to produce sounds as exhaled air passes through the elastic bands. These bands can relax and contract, causing vibrations, which can then cause differences in the sound that is produced. We then take a look at the overall structure of the alveoli. Note that the alveoli are present at the ends of the terminal bronchioles. The alveoli are considered the site of gas exchange, where oxygen is diffusing through the epithelium into the blood and carbon dioxide is flowing out of the blood into the alveolar space. This eventually will be pushed out of the lungs as we exhale. Most of the respiratory tract of mammals is lined with ciliated epithelium. If you recall from the earlier presentation, ciliated epithelium produces a lot of mucus. The mucus is very important as it will trap foreign particles as they enter into the lungs. In addition, the cilia can beat or move, which will force the mucus upward into the pharynx for eventual elimination through coughing or swallowing. This is a very important process to both clean and protect the airways. In general, the alveoli do not have cilia. As a result, they are very vulnerable to infection if particulates eventually reach the alveolar surface. If this occurs, this can lead to inflammation as well as lung damage. Alveoli themselves produce a compound named surfactant. Surfactant consists of phospholipids as well as protein. Surfactant is important in reducing the surface tension. This helps to keep the alveoli in an inflated state. The lungs themselves are lined with a double-layered pleural membrane. This pleural membrane also lines the thoracic cavity. The two layers will slide along each other as the lungs fill up and deflate. This will help to maximize lung expansion during the breathing process. In general, there are three main types of breathing: positive pressure breathing, negative pressure breathing, which we'll examine on the next slide, and unidirectional flow. Positive pressure breathing occurs mostly in amphibians. Air will be forced into the lungs through contractions of the oral cavity. Air will then be forced out of the lungs when the body wall compresses the lungs through muscular contractions. Unidirectional flow is typically present in birds. In this instance, air is passed over a respiratory surface in one direction. This is to ensure that the incoming air does not mix with the exhaled air. Birds, for instance, need 2 full rounds of inhalation and exhalation in order for air to fully pass through their system. Take a look at the diagram to understand the flow of air within the bird lung. In negative pressure breathing, this is common in humans. Air will be drawn into the lungs due to pressure changes as the thoracic cavity expands. As the thoracic cavity relaxes, the air will be passively expelled. In general, air is inhaled as the diaphragm contracts and pulls down the thoracic cavity. This will open up the rib cage to create negative pressure to then draw air in. As the ribs get smaller and the diaphragm relaxes, the air will then be exhaled passively. Lung capacity can be measured in 3 main ways: by examining tidal volume, vital capacity, and residual volume. Tidal volume reflects the volume of air that is inhaled and exhaled in one breath. Vital capacity reflects the maximum tidal volume, and residual volume refers to the volume of air that remains in the lungs after a forced exhalation. As we've seen with other processes in the body, breathing must also be regulated. Breathing is typically controlled by blood pH and also by a pair of breathing control centers that exist in the brain. These consist of specialized neurons within the medulla oblongata. The blood carbon dioxide levels are important in determining the pH of the cerebrospinal fluid. Thus, there is a correlation between pH and carbon dioxide levels. During exercise, the general metabolic rate of the individual will increase, which causes more carbon dioxide to be produced. This will react with water in the blood to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid can then dissociate or partially break down to produce bicarbonate or HCO3- and H+ ions. This will then lower blood pH. This change in pH will cause an increase in the depth and rate of respiration until excess carbon dioxide is eliminated and normal blood pH returns. This diagram depicts the regulation of breathing through blood pH. The normal blood pH exists at about 7.4. If there is an increase in activity or metabolic activity or physical activity, the blood pH will decrease due to the buildup of carbon dioxide in the tissues. This will lead to two main effects. Firstly, this will decrease the pH of the cerebrospinal fluid. This decrease in pH will be detected by the medulla oblongata. In addition, within the blood, the pH will also decrease. There are various types of sensors present in major blood vessels of the carotid arteries as well as aorta that help to detect any changes in blood pH. These sensors will then send signals to the medulla oblongata as well. As a result, rib muscles and diaphragm will increase the rate as well as the depth of ventilation to help lower blood carbon dioxide levels. As a result, the pH will then rise back to normal range. Blood pH is not the only way that the body regulates breathing. The body can also detect changes in oxygen levels. Changes in oxygen are detected by sensory neurons in the aorta as well as carotid arteries. Although high oxygen levels have little effect on breathing rates, low oxygen levels have a distinct change in the breathing rate. Sensors will send signals to breathing control centers to cause an immediate increase in the respiration rate if oxygen levels become too low. In addition, the pons region in the brain also aids in regulating respiration. It does so by controlling the rate of involuntary respiration along with the medulla oblongata. In general, negative feedback will occur through sensors in the lungs to limit the amount of over-inhalation or overexpansion of the lungs. This is to ensure that the lung tissue is preserved and not damaged through the process of breathing. We are now going to take a look at some of the adaptations that exist. Gas exchange and circulatory systems work in a highly coordinated fashion. This is to ensure that oxygen is delivered to tissues and carbon dioxide can be removed. In addition, respiratory pigments can help aid in the transport of oxygen within the body. This will help to overcome the fact that oxygen has a very low solubility in blood. We've seen how hemoglobin increases the transport ability of oxygen in red blood cells. Hemocyanin is another pigment that is present in arthropods that can also increase the amount or solubility of oxygen in blood. In general, most carbon dioxide forms bicarbonate, as we've seen in the slide previous. This helps to reduce the amount of carbon that actually needs to be eliminated out from the body. Thus, the body has a way to utilize the most of the carbon that is being produced by metabolic processes. Bicarbonate is an important buffer to help maintain the blood pH. And finally, diving mammals such as the seal are highly adapted to an aquatic environment. They have the ability to store large amounts of oxygen within their tissue through the use of a specialized protein called myoglobin. In addition, they can reduce their heart rate and consumption rate and help to maintain their blood supply to their core organs to ensure that the most important functions are maintained while they are submerged in an aquatic environment. As a result, there are many adaptations that have occurred throughout evolutionary time to maximize the efficiency of gas exchange as well as distributing the gases to the rest of the body tissues in complex animals.